and welcome to And Now You Know, the latest History Channel show where we aim to teach you a little bit more about something you may not have known about. Our topic today, history of the theater in India. I'm your host, Terrence Snyder, and I'll be guiding you along through this show, providing you with some fun facts and leading you through some checkpoints. No need to worry about the checkpoints. They're just a means to help you fully understand the information provided in this show. There will be 2 pop quizzes at the end of each portion of the show with a few multiple choice questions for you to test your knowledge that you've learned so far. They're pretty straightforward. The format of the show is pretty easy. We shall be exploring India from past to present and examining what has happened throughout history to create the theater of India that we know today. From religious influence to the impact of European colonization, several factors have shaped theatrical traditions. By the end of this video, we hope you shall have a stronger understanding of a fascinating culture and a desire to seek out even more knowledge. So why don't we get started by learning the basics of India's history.
Hello, I'm Katie Ellis, Doctor of Southeast Asian Historical Studies at Cambridge University, and I'm going to share with you some of my knowledge of India up to the British colonization. India is located in the southern central area of Asia and is surrounded by the Indian Ocean. The history of India dates back centuries and is rich and bountiful. While historians cannot pinpoint the exact dates of habitation, archaeological findings have provided substantial means of creating a basic timeline. Archaeological sites in northern parts of the country have discovered tools crafted by early humans dating back as far as the Middle Pleistocene era, so somewhere between 500,000 and 200,000 years ago. There is confirmed evidence of semi-permanent settlements appearing around 9,000 years ago. Around 3,300 BCE, the early Indus Valley civilization began the movement into the Bronze Age. The civilization was located primarily in modern-day India, as well as some parts of Pakistan, along with Mesopotamia and the ancient Egypt. The Indus Valley is one of the first urban civilizations. The inhabitants produced metals such as copper, bronze, lead, and tin, thus the Bronze Age. Moving into the Vedic period, we begin to see some of the oldest extant texts in India. Named after the sacred Hindu texts of Vedas, these texts are potentially the oldest known in the world, along with the writings of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. The texts were written in Vedic Sanskrit, the predecessor to Sanskrit, the language of nobles and scholars, which most ancient plays and theatrical texts from India are written in. Along with Hindu literature, many Buddhist and Jaina texts emerged during this time, dating as far back as 1000 BCE. These texts, written in Sanskrit, were founded on great literary traditions. It's also during this time that the caste system came into being, meaning that social status and occupation were determined by a person's heredity. Next we reach the Maurya Empire, which took place between 322 and 185 BCE. Under the Mauryan dynasty, ancient India became an extremely powerful political and military empire. In 240 BCE, King Asoka aimed to unite the Indian nation under Buddhism through foreign policy, but was never fully able to accomplish this due to India's involvement with the war against Kalinga. Hundreds of years later, in 320 CE, the Gupta dynasty began to reunite the nation once more, bringing about the Hindu Golden Age. India began to flourish in areas of art, literature, religion, philosophy, and logic between 320 and 550 CE. This period in time is known as the Golden Age of India, as it marked an era of great achievements in many different areas of study. During this time, India experienced a period of peace and prosperity, and with that came much advancement in the arts. It's during this time that several trade routes were formed, connecting India to neighboring cities of Sri Lanka, Thailand, Cambodia, and Burma, to name a few. Religion in India continues to be one of the most influential aspects of India's history, and we shall explore it more thoroughly with our religion expert. It's during this period that great Sanskrit dramas came into fruition. Along with plays, one of the most important texts uncovered from this period is the Natya Sastra, or the study or art of theater. Believed to be written by Bharata Muni, or more likely so, a collaboration of several different authors, between 200 BCE and 100 CE, this text presents the mythological origin of theater in India. It's from this text that we have much of our information about Indian theater from this time. It describes elements of the theater such as architecture, audience seating, and costuming, but we'll go more into that later with our theatrical design expert. After the Golden Age, we make our way into what is known as the Late Classical Age, which is marked by the end of the Gupta Empire and the collapse of the Harsha Empire in 600 CE. This period, like the Golden Age, is also widely known for its proficiency in the arts. King Harsha of Kannauj successfully united India as his former King Asoka had attempted, but unfortunately the kingdom collapsed after his death. Throughout the centuries to follow, the power continued to shift between different dynasties, and India was divided into sections of rule. By the 1300s, these powers died out, giving way to the rise of the Vijayanagar Empire. During this time, the Hindu Vijayanagar Empire conflicted with the Islamic Bahmani Sultanate, resulting in a mixing of the two cultures that has left lasting effects on both of them. Moving into the 1500s, the Mughal dynasty ruled over most of India, but began to decline in the early 1700s due to invasions from Marathas and Afghans, and their eventual defeat came later during the Indian Rebellion of 1857. By the early 1600s, Europe had made its way to India, bringing with it a whole new culture shock. But more on that later. Back to you, Tara.
As years pass, popular styles and fads are always changing to keep up with the times. From bell-bottom jeans to shoulder pads, we've seen it all, and the same goes for costuming. In most American theater, costuming changes depending on the style of the piece in order to fit the era or the mood that the director wants to convey. When you walk into a theater, you're transported to London during the times of Shakespeare, or maybe you're taken somewhere more familiar like last afternoon. Whatever the situation, time, or theme, costuming plays a huge part in creating the world of the stage. Costuming trends are ever-changing, but nothing compares to tradition. Indian costuming has been upholding tradition for centuries, as much of the costuming techniques found in ancient theatrical traditions still remain prevalent today. With bold colors and rich designs, the costumes of India theater are themselves a piece of art. Now let's turn it over to our expert on traditional theater and learn a little more about how Indian theater came to be.
Hi, I'm Dr. Vanessa Borg, Professor of Traditional Indian Theater Practices at Harvard University. In this program, I'll be walking you through various dramatic epic traditions that exist within India's cultural and theatrical history, up through present styles and dramatic forms. The epic literary traditions started by the Aryans continued to proliferate through the development of Sanskrit drama. This tradition began in approximately 320 AD with the rise of the Gupta dynasty, and it was originally performed mostly for nobles because Sanskrit was the language used by the nobility. The earliest surviving Sanskrit plays were written in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD by Asavagosha. The man who is considered the greatest Sanskrit playwright from the classical period is Kalidasa, who lived from approximately 373 to 415 AD and wrote Shankatula, the most famous Sanskrit play. Shankatula was written in 7 acts and depicts the romance between King Dushyanta and Shankatula, the foster daughter of a hermit, who secretly marry and are then separated by an angry sage who places a curse on them. They are reunited at the end of the drama. This play features several elements that are common to all Sanskrit drama: supernatural aspects, themes of love, nature, imagery, and religion, many characters and locations, and serious as well as comic elements, and has been performed as a play, an opera, and even a ballet. The plot of Sanskrit drama is meant to show the struggles of the hero and the eventual attainment of his desires. There are 5 stages of the development of the action within these plays. Step 1, the hero discovers his goal or desire. Step 2, effort is made to achieve this desire. Step 3, there is hope for the hero to achieve his goal. Step 4, an obstacle comes between the hero and his goal. Step 5, the goal is achieved. Each play concluded with a happy ending. There were no controversies left unresolved, no reason to leave the audience disturbed or wanting at the end. The Natyasastra, an ancient document detailing the traditions and practices of Indian theater, which we'll discuss in detail later on, outlines some specific rules in regards to Sanskrit drama. In regards to time, it stated that the events of an act should take place within a single day. However, exceptions were made for events such as battles, which would obviously need to last longer than that. When it came to place, playwrights were allowed to jump from location to location as needed, sometimes within the same act. Sanskrit drama featured archetypal characters: the just, the powerful, the beautiful lady, the benevolent hero, the charming servants, the witty clown companion, the loyal minions, etc., who usually behaved in a way that was fitting of their social status and class. The heroes of these plays were based off of the heroes of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. They were idealized characters. Sanskrit drama had faded by the end of the 9th century, and by 1208, when the Sultanate of Delhi was established, the tradition of Sanskrit drama had died out completely, and theatrical activities were no longer encouraged. The flavor of Indian drama was still kept alive, however, through regional folk dramas, which were performed in the various vernacular languages of the different regions of India. Some of these plays survive, but the scripts have not been preserved. These forms of folk drama featured mythology and epic material, just as the Sanskrit dramas did, and emphasized spectacle rather than depth of meaning, which also led to the popularity of dance drama, which emphasized movement rather than dialogue. The most famous traditional theater forms of northern India are the Ramalila and the Rasalila, cycle plays about the two incarnations of Vishnu Rama and Krishna, two of the most important gods of the Hindu religion. The Lila plays commemorate and reenact events in the life of Rama and Krishna, and is a tradition of more than 400 years, and the dramatic text of the epic it originates from was written in the 16th century. Performed once a year all over North India in virtually every city and village of Uttar Pradesh and other regions during the Hindu festival of Dasharata. It celebrates Rama's victory over the demon king Ravana. Because it spans a wide region of the country, there is much variety in the styles and modes of presentation. One region performs the entire epic in 31 days, other places may select important episodes and present them as a cycle drama in 7, 10, or 21 days. Often processionally performed, it incorporates tableau and pageants as elements of the performance. The poetic text is recited by a group of singers, while the actors on stage silently enact the events.
One of the most commonly asked questions throughout theatrical history is that of gender roles. It's well known that theater of the Greeks was made up completely of men, regaling citizens of Athens heroic tales, and that young boys adorned in women's attire were given the female leads in Shakespeare's works during his time. Even in places where women were allowed to step on stage, they were not received with open arms. Females in the theatrical profession were often regarded with ill repute in several European countries. So what about India? Well, in ancient India, gender roles did not matter. Theater groups had no limitations when it came to gender. Companies ranged from all male, all female, and mixed gender. As a whole, men and women were treated equally in most aspects during early Indian history based on our current knowledge of ancient India. Women were educated, allowed to marry whom they pleased, and were not limited in any way. This, of course, shifted throughout history, much in part to Islamic invasions and spread of Christianity. But it's interesting to note that early in India's development, women and men were, in fact, equals. This equality of the sexes is not only reflected in the theater of India, but of the religion as well. Being such a major component to the history of India, it's no surprise that Indian religion also has a very important place in theater. Let's see what our religion expert has to say about it, shall we? I'm Professor Julia Wells of Religious Studies at Cambridge University. The most prominent religion in India is Hinduism, but ask a Hindu and they will tell you it's not so much religion as it is a way of life. So what is Hinduism? Well, that's kind of a loaded question. Firstly, Hinduism describes the religions of the majority of people in India and Nepal, as well as some other lesser-known communities in other countries. It's important to note that the formation of Hinduism as we know it today developed in the 19th century, although its origins and beliefs behind it are very ancient, dating back to the Indus Valley civilization. Describing what Hinduism entails is difficult, as it is vast and complex. Part of the reason for this is that Hinduism, unlike other world religions, has no single historical founder. Thus, it does not have a unified system of belief in a creed or declaration of faith. There is no centralized authority, bureaucratic structure, or a single system of soteriology. This makes it very different from the monotheistic Western traditions of Christianity and Islam.
Hinduism is not a category in the classical sense, to which something either belongs or does not, but more in the sense of prototype theory. What this means is that a category does not have rigid boundaries, but there are various degrees and levels to the category. There is no singular form of Hinduism, rather it has many branches and a very ambiguous base to follow. Some even argue that there is no such thing as Hinduism because of this. To put it simply, Hinduism is like an umbrella term covering many different ideas and beliefs within it. So with all of these different branches and ideas, how do we define Hinduism? Well, most Hindu traditions revere a body of sacred texts, the Veda, though not all do. Some see the text as revelation, others regard rules from the Veda as essential for salvation, while some philosophies postulate a theistic reality who creates, maintains, and destroys the universe. There are claims that refute all of these, so you can see it can get kind of confusing when talking about Hinduism as a unified religion. There is no singular form to define. Most often, Hinduism is centered and organized around the idea of reincarnation determined by karma, and salvation is freedom from the cycle. Once a soul has completed its journey and has followed the ways of Dharma, the cycle ends, resulting in freedom and peace. This belief is also prevalent in other South Asian religions such as Buddhism and Jainism. Another more universal Hindu belief is that of a transcendent God, which is beyond the universe, which is within all living things and can be approached in a variety of ways. The Supreme Being can be worshipped in any form, a beautiful young girl, an old woman, a regal king, or even just a stone. The transcendent is mediated through temples, icons, living teachers, and saints. This being said, Hinduism is often characterized as polytheistic, as innumerable deities are worshipped, but these deities are regarded as an aspect or manifestation of a higher sacred power. Devotion, or bhakti, is deity through icons and holy persons, provides refuge in times of crisis and even final liberation, or moksha, from karma and the cycle of reincarnation. This transcendent God is also revealed in the Veda in codes of ritual, social, and ethical behavior, called Dharma, which that text reveals. So what exactly is the Veda? Well, it is composed in Sanskrit and is revealed as revelation, or Sruti, and is the source of Dharma. The term Veda translates to knowledge, originally revealed to the ancient sages, or rishi, conveyed to the community by them and passed through the generations as oral tradition initially. The Veda is important for understanding Hinduism, though it is not universally accepted, as some forms reject it due to its ideas on authority and the allowance of social hierarchy. However, all Hindu traditions make reference to the Veda, whether it be in acceptance or rejection, and some scholars have regarded reference to its legitimizing authority as criterion of being Hindu. Other than being a ruling book for the Hindu faith, the Veda serves more as guidelines for the religion. It is acted rather as a reference point for the construction of Hindu identity and self-understanding. The closest thing you can call religion is Dharma. It incorporates truth, duty, ethics, law, and natural law. Acceptance of Dharma is not acceptance of beliefs, but practice and performance of certain duties. It is the power that upholds and supports society and the cosmos, constrains phenomena into particularity, and makes things what they are. The boundaries of what a Hindu can and cannot do are determined by his or her particular social group and or caste, stratified in hierarchical order and gender. This hierarchy is determined by distinctions of purity, the higher pure caste at the top, and pollution, the lower polluted caste at the bottom. Overall, what a Hindu does is far more important than their beliefs. Later in this program, we'll talk in depth about Hindu tradition and mythology and how they relate to theater of India.
Another topic of debate throughout history is that of the purpose of theater. Some argue theater is merely a means to entertain, a glorified way of storytelling, but it's much more than that. True, theater does serve as a great form of entertainment, but it's also a valuable teaching tool. Ancient Greeks first used theater as a way to teach the morals of epic tales. They depicted man's place in the world, his relationship to the gods, society, and himself. Throughout the centuries, the theatrical form has grown from this and still maintains its didactic roots. In India, this is no different. Much like the Greeks, early Indian theatrical artists believed theater could educate as well as entertain audiences. Plays told stories of the past and both delighted as well as taught important moral lessons to the masses. So where did these plays take place and how were they done? Well, let's hand it over to our technical theater expert to shed a little light on the world of Indian theatrical theater and design.
Hello, I'm Sir Christopher Stull from Theater Technology Institute's Associates. Today I'll be discussing several innovations in Indian theatrical history with you. I'll start with a text that is truly the foundation of it all. The Nasistrata. The Nasistrata is an ancient Indian document detailing elements of the performing arts, including theater, dance, and music. It was written between 200 BCE and 200 CE, and is most commonly believed that it was written by Bharatma. The impact that the Nasistrata had on Indian music, classical dance, literature, and music is huge. Through the text, primarily deals with stagecraft and covers the topics of stage design, dance, acting techniques, music, makeup, costuming, and instruments used during this period. The Nasistrata divides human experience into 8 basic sentiments: erotic, comic, pathetic, furious, heroic, terrible, odious, and marvelous. Although all these sentiments can be present in a single drama, the Nasistrata says that there should only be one dominant sentiment. Corresponding to the 8 sentiments, the Nasistrata lists 8 emotions: love, mirth, anger, sorrow, energy, terror, disgust, astonishment. There are also 33 transitory feelings in 8 Sthivika states, such as paralysis, perspiration, horripilation, change of voice, change of color, weeping, and fainting. The theory is that an actor combines these emotions, feelings, and states to create emotions in their audience. Sanskrit theater was performed on sacred ground by priests who had been trained in the necessary skills, such as dance, music, and recitation, in a hereditary process. Under the support of royal courts, performers were members of companies that were directed by a stage manager, Sudhara, who may also have acted in the drama. The position of the stage manager was thought of as being the same as that of a puppeteer. The literal meaning of Sudhara is holder of the strings or threads. The performers were trained rigorously in vocal and physical technique, and there was no prohibitions against female performers. Certain sentiments were considered inappropriate for men to enact, however, and were thought better suited to women. Ramalia and Rastilia theater circles were originally staged by amateur actors in the community and were performed in makeshift open-air theaters. During scene changes or moments of dramatic tension, a singer, usually a priest, in the sidelines would recite verses from the Rahamana. The Ramalia, held in the Ramanga region, however, is held over the course of 31 days, instead of the usual 10. This style of production is known for lavish sets, dialogue, and visual spectacle. Permanent structures were built as well as temporary structures to represent various locations within the myths being told. Because of this, the entire city would be transformed into a gigantic set. At the beginning of the theatrical pageant and festivals, the Kashi Naresh, an important religious figure believed to be the incarnation of Lord Shiva, would ride an elephant at the head of the colorful procession, dressed in silk. When it comes to architecture, the Nasistrata says that there were 3 types of theaters: Vakarashta, rectangular; the Kakarasha, square; and the Trirasha, triangle. There are also 3 sizes of theater mentioned: small, reserved for the commoners; middle, which had the best acoustics and was reserved for kings; and large, which was reserved for the gods. The largest theaters measured 108 hastas, or 54 yards; the middle-sized 84 hash, or 32 yards, and the small was 32 hash and 16 yards. And these theaters also featured a green room. The Nasistrata dedicates 4 main pillars to the 4 castes and portions of the whole theater to be various gods for the sake of protection. A feast and music would often precede the ceremony, and then a good plot of ground would be chosen and cleared of all grass, shrubs, bones, skulls, etc. The whole theater hall would be decorated with woodwork representing creepers, birds, animals, etc. The walls would be decorated with beautiful paintings of men and women and of plants and trees, after the walls had been made smooth and white with chunam. The seating was made of either brick or wood and in the form of gallery, sophanicati. They were 1.5 feet high above the ground to give a good view of the stage. Another term used to describe the audience seating in the Natastrada, divahumini, has been debated to either mean that the theaters had 2 stories, contained box seats, or that the seats were in a gallery form in a pit in front of a raised stage. Extra attention was given to the importance of acoustics and resonance of sound within the architecture of the theater. The most typical theater of the Sanskrit period was around 86 feet long and 48 feet wide, divided equally into stage and auditorium with seating capacity probably between 200 and 500 people, and divided according to social class. A curtain divided the stage and the dressing room / backstage area. Performance spaces for theater companies were set up in courtyards of similar areas, and acting troupes were invited to court by the nobility. The performers used elaborate costumes, but no scenery.
The main purpose of makeup in theatrical forms, such as Bharatanatyam or Kathak, is to enhance each feature on the face beautifully so the expressions can be seen throughout the theater. Overall, it's a very dramatic look. Thus, we have highly defined cheekbones, eyes, and lips that can be seen very clearly from any point in the audience. So now that we've learned about history, religion, theatrical practices, and technical theater, let's get to know some of the important figures that make up ancient Indian theater.
Hi, I'm Courtney Washington, Professor of Asian Sociological Figures at Brown University, here to talk with you about important historical figures within the timeline of Indian theatrical tradition. We'll start with Bharata Muni, who is generally considered to be the author of the Nyatasara. Bharata was an ancient musicologist who proposed the theory of 3 types of acting, classified Sanskrit drama into 10 types, and outlines a set of rasas of moods and emotions, which were to be influential in defining Indian dance, music, and theater. It is possible that the Natyashastra was written by more than one author, but Bharata was considered to be the father of the Indian theatrical art forms. Sudhakar wrote one of the earliest known Sanskrit plays in the 2nd century BCE, The Little Clay Cart. This drama featured many twists and turns and was filled with romance, sex, royal intrigue, and comedy. The plot revolves around a young man named Charuta and his love for The plot revolves around a young man named Charudata and his love for Vasatasena, a courtesan. Their love affair is complicated by a royal courtier who also lusts after Vasastena, and comedy is added by the use of mistaken identity and thieves. The plot of The Little Clay Court is very similar to Moulin Rouge, and this play gained widespread attention when it was staged in New York in 1924. The first true Sanskrit dramatist is believed to have been Asvaghosha, a philosopher-poet born in northern India in the 2nd century CE. Asvaghosha wrote in classical Sanskrit as opposed to Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit, which is what most Buddhist literature was written in prior to his time. Asvaghosha is considered to be the greatest Indian poet prior to Kalidasa, and one of the greatest Sanskrit dramatists. He isn't as prolific, however, as the playwright Vasi, who lived at approximately 400 CE. The plays written by Vasa were only known to historians through the references of later writers, the manuscripts themselves being lost. Manuscripts of 13 plays written by him were discovered in an old library in Trivandrum in 1913. A 14th play was later discovered and attributed to Vasa, but its authorship is disputed by scholars. Shakuntala, which Vanessa described earlier, is commonly held up as the best and most famous Sanskrit play. It was written by Kalidasa, who is considered the greatest Sanskrit playwright from the classical period. Kalidasa lived from about 733 to 415 CE, and may and may have lived at the court of King Chandragupta in Ujjain city, but little is known about him or his life, so historians aren't sure. He was a talented lyric poet, which sets him apart from the other playwrights of his time. His poetry and plays often feature themes of love, nature imagery, and religion, common themes in traditional Indian theater. And his writing is characterized by the use of simple but beautiful prose and his extensive use of similes. Kalidasa holds the same position in Sanskrit literature that Shakespeare holds in English literature. Dandin was a 6th to 7th century Sanskrit author of prose romances. All of his writings were in Sanskrit, and he was best known for composing the Kavidarsa, or Mirror of Poetry, the handbook of classical Sanskrit poetics. He is known for his complex sentences and creation of extremely long compound words. The powerful Indian emperor Harsha is credited with having written 3 Sanskrit plays, as well as the Indian king Shudraka. Actors were called Bharata, also known as Nata or Nartaka. Female actors were referred to as Nati or Natakaya. These terms were also applied to dancers and acrobats. Roles could be taken by actors who were approximately the same age as the character, or older or younger. Women could play men, men could play women. The rules weren't very strict before British colonization. Some records have indicated that there were some companies entirely composed of women, and that actresses were considered better singers, but actors more appropriate to show battle scenes and men's voices considered better for recitation. An ideal actor had intelligence, strength, beauty, knowledge of time and tempo. They had to know symbolic gestures, be able to sing and dance, and be able to recite well enough to be heard and understood in open-air theater.
So that's your whirlwind tour through ancient Indian theater. You know what that means? Pop quiz! Great job! So now that we have a nice background on ancient India, let's venture into the theater of India from the British colonization to modern times. First, some history.
So let's pick up where we left off. In 1498, a new sea route from Europe to India was created by Vasco da Gama, providing a direct link for Indo-European commerce. Trading posts were first set up by the Portuguese, followed by the Dutch, the British, and ultimately the French in the early 1600s. Because of the economic and political troubles in India, the European traders gradually established political influence and began appropriating land. Despite multiple European countries gaining control in India, most of them eventually lost all of their territories to the British. This emergence of power came mostly from the prowess of the British East India Company, which was given permission by the Mughal Emperor Jahangir to establish trade in India during the early 17th century. After all of this European influence, India would see several wars in the coming years. The First Carnatic War broke out as a battle between the British and the French over territories, with India serving as the battleground. French ships were captured on the coast of India, and the British city of Madras was taken under siege by the French. The war eventually ended with the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle. 3 years later, the Second Carnatic War broke out as a result of a feud between Nasir Jung and Muzaffar Jung over who was the rightful heir to the throne after the death of Nizam-ul-Mulk. The French supported Muzaffar Jung, and the British supported Nasir Jung. The war lasted until 1754 with the Treaty of Pondicherry. Not 2 years later, the 7 Years' War came into fruition, and thus the Third Carnatic War for India. Once again, conflict arose between the French and the British, and India lay in the middle of it all. The war resulted with the allowance of the French to have trading posts in India, but French traders were forbidden from administering them. Ultimately, this meant that the French's attempts at gaining power in India came to an end, handing it over to British rule. So after all of these wars, the British East India Company gained exclusive control over the Carnatic region of India and extended their power to control Bengal as well. Trading was completely monopolized by the British, and they took advantage of the hardships India was facing during this time. British influence continued into the 1800s until the Indian Rebellion in 1857. Tired of the influence of the British East India Company, a group of soldiers rebelled against the company's rule. Unfortunately, the rebellion was poorly planned. The group was disorganized, rebels had no unified goal in mind, and simply weren't prepared to fight the British. They had virtually no outside support and thus no funding. The rebellion was doomed from the onset, and the soldiers were violently suppressed. The British government regained control of the company and were determined that a rebellion of such magnitude would not occur again. All the power of the East India Company was transferred to the British Crown, which controlled much of the territories in India. Although the number of British in India was small, they were able to rule 2/3 of the subcontinent directly. During the 19th and 20th centuries, efforts were put in place to return India to a self-ruling country. It began when Indian councillors were put in place to advise the British Viceroy. Throughout the course of a few years, the number of Indian council members grew, but the British still maintained the higher positions of authority. During the 1920s, leaders such as Mohandas Gandhi began leading movements campaigning against the British Raj through peaceful tactics. Some more militaristic methods were also put in place against British rule, but it was the non-violent approach that succeeded in making India an independent country in 1947. The British were weakened by the Second World War, and not wanting to engage with India, agreed to grant India independence, and it remains that way today.
While in our society we usually separate the art forms of theater and dance, in India the two are very closely knit, and often one and the same. Dance is not used merely as visual entertainment, but it aids in the depiction of the stories being told. Actors use their bodies for added articulation for storytelling, recreating myths and tales through movement, giving way to styles such as the ever-popular Bollywood. Let's find out more about more modern theatrical styles.
Bengali folk drama is a style of theater that was originally performed by illiterate communities and passed down from generation to generation. It's performed for entertainment as well as education and consists of a combination of dance, song, music, and acting. There are many different subgenres and regional dialects of Bengali folk drama, which I'll go into briefly now. Jatra is the most common and popular form. Jatras contain heroism, mythological stories, folk tales, and themes such as love and tragedy. Jatra means journey or going and has a religious basis. The earliest forms of Jatra drama started with the Bhaktari movement in the 16th century. Palagan is a form of Bengali drama that emerged in the late 18th century. It features an oral delivery of the Mahingsa Gingta, a collection of folk ballads from the region of Mahingsa, Bangladesh. Al-Kap drama is a combination of music, dance, and theater presented in 5 parts. It is used as a reflection of rural society with a focus on social and economic conditions of rural communities. Kavigan drama features folk poets who sing and perform. Normally, a Kavigan is sung by 2 groups. Each group is led by a Kavial or Sarktar, and the accompanying singers repeat what the leader said and are called dohars. There are many other forms of regional Bengali folk drama, but those are the main ones worth mentioning. Next we come to Kathakali theater, which was developed in the 17th century. Originally, these performances lasted all night, but have been modified since they were originally produced so that they now only last 3 to 4 hours. They heightened elements of Sanskrit drama. Violence and death were shown in pantomime, dance was involved, and the stories revolved around clashes in good and evil, with the good always winning. The passions of demons and gods were depicted, as well as those of ordinary humans. Over 100 stories were written for Kathakali dance, but only about 1/3 are still performed today. Against the backdrop of this rich tradition, Indian drama was reborn during British colonization in 18th and 19th centuries. Translations started appearing simultaneously of Sanskrit classics and Western classics, particularly Shakespeare. Folk forms of drama continued to exist in many different forms, but beginning in the 1850s, we begin to see Indian playwrights and theater participants staging their own plays in their respective languages in styles that were a hybrid of traditional theater and Western styles of drama. The rise of urban entertainment theater, popularly called Parsi theater, also corresponded to the Western influences introduced to India by the British. Unlike traditional folk and tribal theater, Parsi theater was acted out in interior spaces, now called proscenium theaters. Geared to amuse urban middle and working classes whose population was rising in big cities due to industrialization, this theater produced a combination of melodrama, humor, romance, and social criticism. This genre was an interesting mixture of Western naturalistic drama, opera, and several local elements. Music was its life breath. The actors of this theater were also great singers. The acting became naturalistic and melodramatic in contrast to the stylized techniques of traditional Indian theater. Parsi theater productions chose their storylines from diverse sources, popular mythological folklore, and contemporary life. Yakshanga is a theater form that has become popular over the past 200 years, though it was developed before that and is believed to have evolved from pre-classical music and theater during the Bhakkari movement, a large Hindu religious movement which started around the 15th century and had a significant impact on Indian theater. Yakshanga theater combines dance, music, dialogue, costumes, makeup, and a unique style and form of stage techniques. It is traditionally played the whole night until sunrise the next morning and has been compared to the Western style of opera. A performance usually depicts a story from an Indian epic poems in the Puranas, ancient Hindu texts. It consists of a narrator who narrates the story by singing prepared character dialogues backed by musicians playing traditional musical instruments as the actors dance to the music and perform actions that portray the story as it is being narrated. All the music, dance, and dialogue are improvised in these plays, and it's not uncommon for actors to get into philosophical debates or arguments while still staying in character.
The style of dance in India is a very exact art form. Every body part is engaged in some way, and the slightest change in hand placement can completely change the meaning of the movement. It takes years to become proficient, as though it seems simple enough, it's very complex and intricate, making it even more awe-inspiring to watch. So in the last half we got an overview of Hinduism. Now let's see how religion directly impacted Indian theater. So before we cover the basics of Hinduism and how to define it, now let's venture into the world of religious traditions and mythologies. Firstly, as we discovered in Part 1, Hinduism is not similar in its religious style as Christianity, which bases itself off of faith. Hinduism returns to the sacred, a quality of mysterious power which dwells in objects, people, and places, and which is opposed to chaos and death. The sense of a sacred power has always been of vital importance to man throughout the history of religions. In Hinduism, a sense of the sacred might be experienced as a sense of greater being outside of the self, such as a feeling of awe, fascination, and mystery, or the sense of the sacred may be an inner or contemplative experience within the self, which may be called a mystical experience. This state can be seen in popular religious festivals, personal devotional, and aesthetic practices which result in states of inner ecstasy. The boundaries between the sacred and everyday are fluid, and one can experience this ecstasy one day and being completely normal the next. For example, a ritual dance performer who is possessed by a god one day will the next day be simply human. Things become sacred by having our attention directed to it in a special way. Now let's move into some of the traditions of Hinduism. There are essentially two models of tradition in the Hindu faith: the arboreal model and the river model. The arboreal model claims that various sub-traditions branch off from a central, original tradition, often founded by a specific person. The river model is basically the exact opposite, claiming that a tradition is comprised of multiple streams which merge into a single main stream. More contemporary Hinduism can't be traced to a common origin, and so it is most often identified with the river model, as it is composed from several different origins. The many traditions that compose contemporary Hinduism can be subdivided into three broad headings, the first of which is the tradition of Brahmanical orthodoxy. These traditions are focused upon a particular deity or group of deities. Among these traditions, three are particularly important in Hindu self-representation: Vaishnava, which is focused on the deity Vishnu and his incarnations; Shaiva, which is focused on Shiva; and Sakta traditions, which focus on the goddess or Devi. There is also an important tradition of Brahmins called Smartas, Those who follow the Smriti or secondary revelation, who worship 5 deities, Vishnu, Shiva, Surya, Ganesha, and Devi. Each of these traditions have their own sacred texts and rituals, which still falling into the general category of Hinduism. Through all these religious traditions and the theology of Vedanta, the unfolding of a sophisticated discourse about the nature and content of sacred scriptures, which explores questions of existence and knowledge. It is the theological articulation of the Vedic traditions. The Vedanta tradition became the philosophical basis of the Hindu Renaissance during the 19th century, and is pervasive in the world religion which Hindu has become. The second branch of traditions are the Renouncer traditions. These traditions expose the values of asceticism and world transcendence in contrast to the Brahmanical householder values of affirming the goals of worldly responsibility or dharma, worldly success and profit or artha, and erotic and aesthetic pleasure or kama. The final branch consists of the popular traditions. These exist within a specific geographical area or within a particular village. They are less concerned with asceticism than with ensuring that crops grow, that illness keeps away from the children, and that one is not haunted or possessed by ghosts. Such popular traditions are low caste and need to appease hot deities, particularly goddesses, who demand offerings of blood and alcohol. These traditions are more contemporary, as they have not been studied until quite recently. Now let's discuss some of the important texts of Hinduism which tell us stories and myths of the Hindu faith. One of them is the Mahabharata, which remains the oldest known epic poem in the world. It consists of 100,000 verses and was compiled over several centuries. The text itself has been used throughout India for rituals such as acting out and reciting it orally in villages during festivals. The text is enjoyable story and also holds meaning and truth about the ethical battle on the human plane, and for the battle between the lower and higher self on a world-transcending plane. Another popular text is the Ramayana, which tells the story of King Rama. These are the numerous versions of this text, and it has appeared in several dramatic forms, including a Hindu television production in the 1930s which attracted 80 million viewers to village performances or stage productions. The final text to talk about is the Puranas, which loosely translates to stories of the past. It is a large, complex narrative which contains genealogies of kings and deities up to the Gupta dynasty. It is created by oral traditions through the centuries, which were written down to create the Puranas. The text covers 5 topics: creation of the universe, destruction and recreation of the universe, genealogies of gods and kings, mythological practitioners of humanity, and the history of the solar and lunar dynasties of kings, from which all kings trace their descent. Stories from all these texts can be found in dramatic form and remain a popular source material today.
One of the biggest debates in artist circles is that of film versus theater. Many believe that film and television will someday win out over live performances. In India, this debate takes a different twist than that of our own culture. With the emergence of Bollywood, the theatricality once limited to the stage can now be seen across the world, which poses the question, will the filming of these theater-based movies bring an end to live theater, or do they aid in popularity? Only time will tell, as society's view of art is constantly changing. How about we visit with our technical theater correspondent once more to see how technical theater has evolved in more contemporary times.
The staging for regional theater events was often very simple, but decorative. Katharaki Theater was presented at night by torchlight on a stage about 16 square feet, hung with a canopy of flowers. Traditionally, this form of theater was to be performed inside temples, palaces, or the houses of nobles and aristocrats. Music and instruments played an important role in the production. Drums, called shanda, mandalam, and edaka, were performed by musicians, and lead singers used shangrala, gongs struck by a wooden stick, and elatham, a pair of cymbals. During their performance, a Katharaki actor uses immense concentration, skill, and physical stamina gained through training based on the ancient martial art of Kerala to prepare for their roles. This training can last for 8 to 10 years. In Katharaki, the story is only told through the hands, facial expressions, and body movements. These expressions that are used are derived from the Nasistrata. There is an elaborate makeup code to Katharaki drama The makeup can often be classified into 5 basic sets. Pacha, green, the dominant color which is used to portray noble male characters. Kathi, characters with an evil streak, the anti-heroes of the play who are represented with streaks of red in a gold-painted face. Kari, demons, who have completely red faces. And Thati, uncivilized characters who are painted with black makeup. And Minuku, women and lovely characters whose faces are painted with yellow. There are other modifications to these makeup rules. It's a complicated system. Parsi urban theater is based on spectacle. Huge settings and colorful backdrops are essential. These performances are staged in semi-permanent structures on proscenium stages that have had wings and drop curtains. And the use of special effects was something that was focused on. This can be considered India's first form of commercial theater. The stage was normally divided into front and back for the staging of main and subsidiary action. The black cloths were framed in the proscenium arch like in a window, so to the viewer there appeared to be a continuity of space and time. One portion of the set would be placed inside the arch and the other beyond it. This style of theater was influenced greatly by Western innovations, which were brought to India through colonization, such as the mechanical devices used to operate flying figures and furniture imported directly from theater companies in London. Vampire pits and flying beds were used to work miraculous appearances and disappearances into the plot, which was helpful with particularly romantic or mythological tales. Yakshagana performances would begin with the beating of several different beats on drums called paraki or avara for as long as an hour before the actors would begin to play. The stage was a square at ground level with 4 poles fixed at the 4 corners to mark the area. The audience would sit on 3 sides and the performance would last all night, with the half curtain held by only 2 stagehands. The actors wore elaborate costumes, headdresses, and face paints, but despite these massive, heavy costumes and jewelry, the dancing was fast and energetic. There were acrobatic leaps, kicks, jumps into the air, and intricate footwork. The Tala Mangala is a variation of Yakshagana that is performed indoors without costume, makeup, or dance, and is held during the monsoon season. The drummers and artists would sit on the floor opposite each other, and play filled with philosophy and narration would be chosen to be recited or sung. Much of the focus of this type of drama was on hand gestures, which formed a sort of theatrical sign language.
You may have begun to notice some reoccurring names in the past few sections. This is because we're starting to see the emergence of theater dynasties, or a long line of notable theatrical figures in a family. One of these dynasties is the Kapoor family. Consisting of actors and directors, the Kapoor family has been a prominent name in Indian theater and cinema for over 80 years. Let's turn it back over to Courtney to learn more about the Kapoor family, along with some other notable modern theatrical figures.
Our first record of Western and Indian theatrical traditions coming together within a performance in India is in 1795, when a Russian violinist named Gerasim Stepanovich Lebedev staged a Hindi and Bengali mixed-language version of a short play by Paul Jodrell. This planted the seeds for Western influences impacting the theater of India, which really began happening when the British colonized the country in 1857. The British established a small professional theater in Calcutta, and it was here that for the first time an Indian actor, Vaishnava Charan Audi, played Othello in 1848. He was the second person of color after Ira Aldridge in the U.S. ever to play Shakespeare's Tragic Moor. One of the most influential Indian playwrights was Rabindranath Tagore, who was born in 1861 and died in 1941. He received a very good education because his father was a prominent philosopher and social reform advocate. His education was strongly influenced by the West. He even studied in England, where he discovered a love for Shakespeare. He was put in charge of managing the estates that his father owned, and and the Shalitata region, and through contact with the villagers, he became familiar with Bengali folk dramas. His plays were written in Bengali and covered many different topics and styles. Nature's Revenge, written in 1884, features nature imagery and Sanskrit poetry. Rakta Karui, written in 1924, is an allegory. Viz Barjan, written in 1890, is the invention of a mythology story intended to promote nonviolence. Last Cause and The Bachelor's Club, both written in 1904, are realistic satires. And Chitragada, written in 1936, is a dance drama. Tagore was the first non-European to win the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1913, and was also knighted in 1915, though he relinquished his title in protest after the Amistrar Massacre in 1919.
As a result of the influence of Western writers such as Ibsen and Bernard Shaw on India's theatrical scene, we see the development of more theater aimed towards social criticism. The two genres of realism that were produced were critical realism and socialist realism. An example of Indian socialist realism is the classic play Kanya Shokam by Veerashagiyam Pantulu. This play attacked the dowry system that was a part of the traditional Indian marriage system. Another prolific social playwright was Adya Ragachari, who wrote about social evils such as the caste system, exploitation of women, and religious hypocrisy. Socialist realism was associated with the IPTA, or Indian Political Theatre Association. IPTA was a group of artists all wedded to the view of theatre as means for social change. IPTA was closely related to the Indian Communist movement. Though amateur theatres not owing direct allegiance to communism and at the same time wedded to social change also came into being in different regions. One such theatre was Prithvi Theatre, founded by the movie star Prithvi Kapoor in 1944. After 1962, Prithvi Theatre became a full-fledged theatre house and is still active today. Though women had performed in ancient theatrical productions, they had been less accepted on stage after British colonization. The Indian Political Theatre Association's actions led to improved standards of production and management across the country, as well as the inclusion of women on stage once again. Soon after India's independence in 1974, the theatre scene began to change radically. The impact of IPTA began to wane. Theatre received a setback due to the challenge of the more popular genre of cinema, which eventually led to Bollywood as we know it today. Amateur theatre continued to flourish in big cities like Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, and Bangalore. A writer of note around this time was Narayan Prasad Bittab, author of Mahabharat in 1913 and Ramayan in 1915, both adaptations of great Indian epics. He also adapted an Indian version of Shakespeare's Comedy of Errors, called Gorakh Danda. Another popular dramatist was Radhi Shyam Khattak, whose plays were often about religious issues.
We've reached the end of part 2. You know what that means. Pop quiz! Stay tuned for previews of next week's episode. Crop circles, fact or fiction?
Aliens!